The silence in the grand chamber of the Valeri High Synod was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing atmospheric pressure generated by the collective anxiety of 1,000 star systems. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and the musky, dry aroma of ceremonial incense, hung motionless, suspended in the artificial gravity of the station that orbited the dying red giant of Kael'thas. This was the heart of the Dominion, a civilization that had spanned the spiral arm for 10,000 cycles, a civilization that prided itself on the absolute predictability of the cosmos, the rigid hierarchy of matter and energy, and the supreme dominance of their own naval supremacy. Yet, in this moment, the silence was born of fear, a sensation the high justicars and fleet admirals were biologically ill-equipped to process. At the center of the obsidian amphitheater, a holographic projection shimmered, dominating the view of the assembled counselors. It displayed a sector of space on the fringe of the known charts, a region usually reserved for navigational hazards and dust clouds. But there, amidst the swirling void, sat an object that defied every aesthetic and architectural philosophy the Valeri held sacred. It was a blocky, brutish thing, a vessel of sharp angles, exposed conduits, and darkened hull plating that seemed to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. It possessed none of the graceful curves or bioluminescent elegance of a Valeri cruiser, nor did it hum with the harmonic resonance of a singularity drive. It was silent, cold, and drifting. High Admiral Vorian, his carapace gleaming with the iridescent polish of his rank, clicked his mandibles in a rhythm of agitation that echoed softly against the high-vaulted ceiling. He stood upon the dais, his multifaceted eyes twitching as they processed the streams of telemetry scrolling rapidly down his retinal display. To his left sat the High Priestess Lyra, her robes of spun nebula silk trailing onto the floor, her expression one of deep spiritual repulsion. To his right was Counselor Kael, the pragmatic voice of the economy whose primary concern was the disruption of trade routes. But Vorian's concern was immediate and lethal. The object, this human ship, as the decoded transmission had identified it, had appeared from nowhere. It had not traversed the hyperlanes. It had not warped in with the telltale gravitational shear of a jump drive. It had simply manifested, bleeding into reality like a stain upon a pristine canvas. The Valeri sensors, the most advanced in the galaxy, had failed to predict its arrival, and that failure was a terrifying vulnerability that Vorian could not abide. He looked out at the assembly, seeing the ripple of unease moving through the hundreds of delegates. They were waiting for him to speak, to give the order that would restore order to their world view. They wanted violence. They wanted the unknown to be burned away so that the known could resume its comforting rhythm. "It is a mockery of engineering," Vorian intoned, his voice amplified by the acoustic architecture of the chamber. "It lacks shielding of any recognizable frequency. Its propulsion output is negligible. It sits there adrift like a corpse in the water. And yet," he paused, tapping a claw against the console, "it has penetrated our inner perimeter without triggering a single alarm. This is not an act of negligence on our part. It is a technological impossibility unless—" He left the sentence hanging, allowing the implication to settle, unless the laws of physics as the Valeri understood them were incomplete, or unless this primitive-looking brick of metal possessed capabilities that rendered Valeri science obsolete. "We have hailed it on all frequencies," the communications officer, a young and trembling sub-lieutenant, announced from the pit below the dais. "There is no response, only a low-frequency hum, a carrier wave. It sounds like breathing, High Admiral." The description sent a shudder through the Priestess Lyra. "Abomination," she whispered. "A ghost ship sent by the Void Eaters. It is a trap. It is a contagion. We must purge it before it releases whatever plague it carries." Vorian hesitated. His tactical logic dictated immediate destruction. A vessel that could bypass sensors was a first-strike weapon. If it was a bomber, it was already within range of the orbital shipyards. If it was a scout, it had already seen too much. His finger hovered over the command rune that would authorize the heavy batteries of the defense grid to vaporize the intruder. It would take seconds. A lance of particle energy, and the ugly anomaly would be reduced to drifting atoms. But something held him back. It was not mercy. The Valeri did not practice mercy with potential threats. It was curiosity mixed with a deep, instinctive dread that destroying it might trigger something worse. He looked at the scan data again. The ship was massive, near. Lie 3 kilometers in length, yet its mass reading was fluctuating. One moment it registered as solid durasteel, the next it registered as lighter than a cloud of gas. It was phasing, oscillating between states of matter in a way that should have torn the vessel apart. "Scan it again," Vorian commanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly growl. Full spectrum, deep penetration. I want to know what is inside that hull before I turn it into dust. I want to know if it has a soul, or if it is merely a hollow shell. The sensor operator, a technician of immense skill whose nervous system was hardwired into the station's array, initiated the deep scan. This was an invasive procedure, a high-energy bombardment of tachyons and focused radiation designed to strip away electronic countermeasures and reveal the skeletal structure of any target. Usually, such a scan would provoke a hostile response. It was an act of aggression in itself. The entire chamber held its breath as the holographic display shifted from a visual representation to a schematic one. The outer hull of the human ship was peeled away layer by layer in the simulation. They saw the thick armor plating, scarred by micrometeoroids and the burns of plasma fire from battles fought in unknown stars. They saw the labyrinthine corridors, the utilitarian bulkheads, the utter lack of comfort or art. And then, the scan reached the core. The operator gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock that cut through the silence like a knife. "High Admiral," the operator stammered, their voice trembling so violently that the translation software struggled to stabilize the pitch. "The core, it is not a reactor, it is not a singularity, it is biological." Confusion erupted in the chamber. A biological core? Was the ship alive? A leviathan of the deep void? "Clarify," Vorian barked, slamming his fist onto the dais. "Is it a pilot, a hive mind?" The operator shook their head, their hands flying across the interface, frantically trying to interpret the data that was flooding their neural link. "No, High Admiral, it is not a creature, it is a garden." The word hung in the air, absurd and impossible. The central third of the vessel is a cryostasis chamber of immense proportions, but it is not holding soldiers. It is holding seeds, genetic samples, embryos of 1,000 different species, and at the very center, powering the containment field, is a human, a single human. The display zoomed in. There, suspended in a column of amber liquid, was a figure. Small, frail, lacking the natural armor of the Valeri or the size of the Korg mercenaries. It was a bipedal mammal, eyes closed, wires trailing from its skull into the ship's mainframe. But it was the energy reading coming from the human that froze Vorian's blood. The human was not sleeping. The brain activity was off the charts. It was processing data at a speed that rivaled the station's main computer. The human was the computer. He is regulating the star," the operator whispered, the realization dawning with the force of a revelation. "The readings, look at the solar telemetry." Vorian shifted his gaze to the secondary screen, which monitored the red giant Kael'thas. The star had been unstable for centuries, prone to violent coronal mass ejections that threatened the station and the colony worlds below. It was a dying star, raging against its inevitable collapse. But now, the turbulence in the photosphere was calming. The magnetic field lines were untangling. The solar wind was smoothing into a gentle breeze. The human ship was not a weapon, it was a pacemaker. The energy pulses emitting from the vessel were in direct counterphase to the star's instability. They were singing the star to sleep, soothing its chaotic fury. "If we fire," the operator said, their voice barely audible, "if we destroy that ship, the feedback loop will break. The star will not just return to instability, it will supernova, instantly." The realization hit Vorian with the force of a physical blow. He had been seconds away from ordering the destruction of the entire system. The enemy at the gates was the only thing holding the roof up. The silence in the chamber changed. It was no longer the silence of fear, but of profound, terrifying awe. They had assumed the humans were primitives in a blocky ship. They had assumed they were invaders. Instead, they were witnessing a civilization that had turned its own people into living processors to save stars that were not even their own. "Belay the firing order," Vorian whispered, his voice trembling. "Shields up, but do not target the vessel, target the solar flares. We must assist them if their concentration slips." He did not need to finish the sentence. The one decision had been made. He had chosen to trust the anomaly. He had chosen to listen to the silence rather than fill it with fire. And in that moment, the human ship woke up. The lights on the blocky hull flickered from a dormant red to a piercing, steady blue. A transmission cut through the static, overriding the Synod's communication protocols. It was audio only. The voice was synthesized, flat, yet carried an undertone of immense exhaustion. "This is Keeper 7 of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. We apologize for the intrusion. Your star was screaming. We are attempting to stabilize the localized entropy. Please remain silent. The calculations are delicate." The arrogance of the Valeri shattered. Your star was screaming. The concept was alien, poetic, and terrifyingly practical. Vorian slumped back into his command throne, his mandibles slack. They were not invaders. They were mechanics, and the Valari were merely the tenants of a universe that was breaking down. The hours that followed were a torture of suspense. The High Synod, usually a place of endless debate and posturing, became a silent observation deck. The Valari watched as the Terran ship, which they had deemed ugly, performed a ballet of physics that was beyond their comprehension. Beams of coherent light, invisible to the naked eye but blinding on the sensors, lashed out from the human vessel, striking the photosphere of the red giant. They were not damaging the star, they were stitching it together. Gravity wells were generated and collapsed in microseconds, acting as sutures for the bleeding plasma. The single human in the tank, the Keeper, was doing the work of a god, holding the fusion reaction of a sun in check with their mind. Vorian watched the biometrics of the human. The stress levels were lethal. The human was dying. The effort of processing the solar dynamics was burning out their neural pathways. "They are sacrificing themselves," Priestess Lyra murmured, her xenophobia replaced by a horrified reverence. "Why, we are strangers to them. We would have killed them." "Perhaps," Counselor Kale said quietly, "that is the point. They do not value life as we do, or perhaps they value it so much more." The debate on the nature of humanity had begun, not with weapons, but with a display of altruism so extreme it seemed like madness. Then the crisis spiked. A coronal ejection, massive and unforeseen, erupted from the star's southern pole. It was a death spasm, a wave of plasma that would engulf the station and the human ship alike. The Valari shields would buckle in seconds. Vorian watched the wall of fire approach on the tactical plot. "Brace for impact," he shouted, though he knew it was futile. There was no bracing against the wrath of a sun. But the impact never came. The human ship moved. It did not use thrusters. It did not warp. It simply was in the path of the flare, and then it became the flare. The vessel's shields extended, not as a bubble, but as a funnel. The ship absorbed the blast. The sensors went blind as the energy output exceeded all measurable scales. For 10 minutes, the universe was white noise. When the sensors rebooted, the flare was gone. The star was calm. And the human ship was smoking, its hull glowing cherry red, drifting closer to the station. "They drank it," the sensor operator whispered, seemingly on the verge of tears. "They absorbed the kinetic energy and shunted it into a pocket dimension. I don't know where it went, but they saved us." Hail came again. The voice was weaker this time. "Keeper 7 to Valari Station. Our heat sinks are at capacity. We request permission to dock and vent excess thermal radiation. Also, I would like a glass of water if your chemistry is compatible." The absurdity of the request broke the tension. A glass of water after eating a solar flare. Vorian stood up, his legs shaky but his resolve ironclad. "Permission granted, Keeper 7. We will prepare a docking bay, and we will provide." "Water," he turned to the assembly. "We go to meet them not as conquerors, but as debtors." The docking bay was a cavernous hangar, usually filled with fighters and cargo haulers. Now it was empty, cleared for the arrival of the savior. The human ship was too large to fit inside, so a shuttle detached from its hull, a small, scarred craft that looked like a flying brick. It touched down with a heavy thud, the landing gear groaning. Steam hissed from the vents. Vorian, flanked by his honor guard and the other counselors, waited. The airlock cycled. The ramp lowered. And down walked a group of figures that seemed impossibly small against the backdrop of their impossible deeds. They wore simple gray jumpsuits, stained with grease and smelling of recycled air. They carried no weapons. Their leader, a woman with graying hair and eyes that looked like they had seen the heat death of the universe, stepped forward. This was not the Keeper from the tank, but the captain. "Captain Alina Vance," she said, her voice raspy. She looked at the towering, insectoid Valari, her expression unreadable. She did not bow, she did not flinch. "Thanks for the dock, our heat exchangers were about to melt." Vorian stepped forward, towering over her by 3 feet. He lowered his head, exposing the vulnerable nape of his neck, a gesture of supreme submission in Valari culture. "I am High Admiral Vorian. You have saved our system. You have saved our lives. We judged you to be a threat. We were prepared to destroy you. For this, I offer my life as penance." He unclasped his ceremonial dagger and held it out, handle first. Vance looked at the dagger, then up at Vorian. A faint, tired smile touched her lips. She gently pushed the dagger away. "Keep it, Admiral. We didn't save you for you. We saved the star. It's part of the grid. If this star goes, the sector destabilizes. If the sector goes, the arm collapses. We're just patching the holes." Her casual dismissal of their heroism only deepened the mystery. "The grid?" Vorian asked. "The holes, what are you speaking of?" Vance sighed, looking around at the pristine, ornate station. "You guys really don't know, do you? You're fighting your wars, drawing your borders, playing empire." She gestured to the stars outside the force field. "The fabric of space-time is rotting, Admiral. All those FTL drives you use, the warp jumps. Every time you punch a hole in reality to go faster than light, you leave a scar, a microfracture. You've been doing it for 10,000 years. The universe is bleeding out, my people. We're the cauterizers. We go where the fabric is thinnest, and we hold it together. The revelation struck the counselors like a physical blow. Their greatest achievement, their FTL drive, the engine of their empire, was killing the universe. We did not know, Priestess Lyra gasped. We thought the subspace ripples were natural. Nothing is natural anymore, Vance said, her tone grim. We're from Earth, or what's left of it. We broke our own sky a long time ago. We learned the hard way. Now we try to stop others from doing the same, but we're losing. The fractures are spreading faster than we can stitch them. This was the human reveal. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They were the janitors of the apocalypse, cleaning up the mess left by younger, more arrogant races. The weapons the Valeri feared were tools of cosmic maintenance. The shield was a dimensional suture. The laser was a gravity welder, and the humans were exhausted. They were a species running on fumes, fighting a war against entropy itself. We need to offload the heat, Vance said, getting back to business. And we need supplies, biomass, our keeper. He burned a lot of calories holding that flare back. He needs nutrient paste, high density. We will provide everything, Vorian promised, but you must tell us more. If our drives are destroying the universe, we must stop. Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You can't stop. If you stop FTL, your empire collapses, your trade routes fail, billions starve. It's a trap. Civilization is the trap. We aren't asking you to stop. We're asking you to help us reinforce the walls. The days that followed changed the Valeri forever. The human ship, the indomitable will, remained docked. Valeri scientists boarded her, and what they saw humbled them. The technology was a mix of the primitive and the godlike. The humans used combustion engines to power coffee machines, yet used quantum-entangled neural networks to navigate slipstream currents. It was a culture of desperate pragmatism. Everything was recycled. Nothing was wasted. The Valeri, who lived in post-scarcity opulence, were shocked by the austerity of the human existence. They saw the Keeper, a young man named Ren, floating in his tank. He was awake now, eating voraciously, his eyes scanning screens of data that scrolled too fast for the Valeri to follow. He was not a prisoner. He was a volunteer. He had been modified to interface with the ship, giving up his physical freedom to be the mind that held the ship together. It hurts, Ren told Vorian one day, his voice projected through speakers. When I hold a star, I can feel its fire. It feels like burning, but if I let go, the fire goes out, and the dark is worse. Vorian, a warrior who had fought in a dozen campaigns, felt tears welling in his eyes. This boy was enduring the pain of a son to save people he had never met. Why? Vorian asked. Why do you do this for us? Ren looked at him through the glass. Because someone has to. And we're the only ones who can. But the peace was not to last. The universe, as Vance had said, was rotting, and the rot attracted things. It began with a sensor anomaly on the edge of the system. Not a ship, not a fleet. A tear, a literal rip in the black velvet of space. It was jagged, ugly, and oozing a darkness that was darker than the void. From the tear came the static, a sound that was not a sound but a scream of mathematics breaking down. The Scourge, the Valeri called them in their myths. The Entropy Eaters, the humans called them. They were not ships. They were entities of pure negation. They looked like geometric nightmares, shifting shapes of black glass and white fire. They were drawn to the healing energy of the human ship. They wanted to widen the wound the humans were trying to close. Battle stations, Vorian roared, the klaxons blaring throughout the station. The myths are real. The Valeri fleet, majestic and glittering, deployed to meet the threat. Hundreds of cruisers, their hulls gleaming, formed a defensive wall. They fired their particle lances, their plasma torpedoes. The weapons struck the dark entities and vanished. The energy was absorbed. The entities grew larger. They fed on the energy of the attack. Stop firing, Vance's voice cut through the comms. You're feeding them. Your weapons are energy-based. They eat energy. You're just giving them dinner. Then what do we do? Vorian screamed, watching a Valeri cruiser crumple like a tin can as a dark entity passed through it. How do we fight something that eats our ammunition? We don't fight it with energy, Vance said, her voice turning cold, hard. We fight it with mass. We fight it with the one thing entropy can't eat. Good old-fashioned kinetic impact. The human ship detached from the station. The Indomitable will did not power up weapons. It opened its cargo bays, and from the belly of the beast came the drones, thousands of them. But they weren't firing lasers. They were towing asteroids. They were accelerating huge chunks of iron and nickel to relativistic speeds. Railguns, Vance announced. Electromagnetic acceleration. No plasma, no directed energy. Just a billion tons of rock moving at .1 light speed. Let's see them eat that. The battle that ensued was a chaotic, brutal ballet. The Valeri watched in stunned silence as the humans turned the asteroid belt into a shotgun. The human ship spun, its magnetic tethers whipping asteroids around like a sling, then releasing them. The rocks slammed into the dark entities. There was no absorption this time. The kinetic energy shattered the glass-like forms of the enemy. It was ugly warfare. It was messy. Clouds of debris filled the system, but it worked. The advanced, energy weapons of the Valeri were useless, but the primitive, rock-throwing of the humans was decimating the cosmic horror. However, there were too many of them. The tier in space was widening. A massive entity the size of a moon began to push its way through. It was a leviathan of the void. Its presence caused the Valeri station's gravity generators to fail. People floated in the corridors, screaming. The indomitable will was dwarfed. "We can't stop that one," Ren's voice came over the comms, strained and pained. "It's too big, it's an anchor, it's going to latch onto the star and drain it dry." Vorian watched the tactical plot. The end was here. The Valeri fleet was scattered. The human ship was out of ammo. The Leviathan was opening its maw, a swirling vortex of nothingness aimed at the sun. "Captain Vance," Vorian said, a strange calm settling over him. "It has been an honor. You showed us the truth. I am sorry we could not do more." "Shut up, Admiral," Vance snapped. "We aren't done yet. Ren, you ready?" "Ready, Captain," the boy replied. "It's going to be a one-way trip." "What are you doing?" Vorian demanded. "The twist," Vance said. "I told you we're the janitors. Sometimes when a stain won't come out, you have to bleach the whole floor." The indomitable will began to change. The blocky hull plates shifted, sliding back to reveal the core mechanism. The garden, the cryo-chamber, was ejected, shooting away toward the safety of the Valeri station. "Catch that," Vance ordered. "That's the seeds, that's the future, keep them safe." The rest of the ship, the engines, the reactor, the frame, remained, and then the ship turned inside out. The one decision that Vorian had made, to not fire, now came full circle. He realized what the human ship actually was. It wasn't just a stabilizer, it was a plug. "We're going to plug the hole," Vance said. "Ren is going to overload the paradox drive. We're going to generate a localized event horizon. We're going to create a black hole right in the mouth of that monster. It'll suck the entity back into the void, and then the black hole will evaporate because of the Hawking radiation limiters we've rigged. It'll seal the breach." "You will be destroyed," Vorian cried out. "You cannot do this." "We're already dead, Admiral," Vance said softly. "My crew, we're all terminal, radiation poisoning from years of this work. This was always how it was going to end. We just wanted to make it count." The indomitable will accelerated. It did not fire weapons. It became the bullet. It flew straight into the maw of the void Leviathan. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then a flash of light that was not light but the absence of it. A sphere of pure blackness expanded, swallowing the Leviathan, swallowing the tier in space. The gravity wave hit the station, knock. King everyone to the floor, and then silence. The sensors rebooted. The tier was gone. The Leviathan was gone. The indomitable will was gone. Only the pod remained. The garden. It drifted silently toward the station, its beacon beeping a steady, rhythmic pulse. Vorian stood up. The bridge was destroyed, sparks raining down. He looked at the empty space where the humans had been. He felt a grief deeper than he had ever known. They had misunderstood everything. They had thought the humans were weak because they didn't posture. They thought they were primitive because they didn't use flash. But the humans were the strongest of them all. They were the ones who held the door shut against the dark. The aftermath was a time of mourning, but also of transformation. The Valeri towed the garden pod into their safest dock. They opened it with the reverence of opening a reliquary. Inside, they found the cryotubes, thousands of them, embryos, seeds, DNA samples of extinct creatures from Earth, and in the center, a recording. Vorian played it before the High Synod. A hologram of Captain Vance appeared. She looked younger in the recording, less tired. "If you're seeing this," the hologram said, "then we successfully plugged a breach. Good, now listen closely. This garden isn't just a library, it's a starter kit. The universe is dying, yes, but it can be reborn. We aren't just fixing the old reality. We're trying to build a lifeboat for the new one. The data in this pod contains the coordinates of a stable pocket universe we found. A place untouched by the rot. It's empty. It needs life. We couldn't go. We were too contaminated by the void. But you can go, you and the other races, if you stop fighting, if you stop tearing the sky apart. Take these seeds, plant them, be the gardeners we couldn't be." The message ended. The silence in the grand chamber returned, but it was different now. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of shame and of hope. The Valeri looked at one another. The Korg mercenaries looked at their weapons. The realization settled in. The humans hadn't just saved the star system, they had given them the map to survival. One decision, Vorian whispered to the empty room. I made one decision not to fire, and because of that, we have a future. He looked at the display, at the pod that contained the legacy of a dead world called Earth. He placed his hand on the glass. We will not fail you, he vowed. We will be the gardeners. Act 3 began not with a battle, but with a handshake. The Valeri reached out to their rivals, the Korg, the Ilari, the Thrax. They showed them the recording. They showed them the data. The revelation that their wars were killing the universe stopped the conflicts overnight, not out of morality, but out of survival. The Great Alliance was formed, not an empire, but a construction crew, a fleet of gardeners. They built the Ark. It took a generation. They dismantled their warships to build hull plating. They turned their weapons factories into hydroponic labs. They followed the coordinates Vance had left. It was a perilous journey through the rotting sectors of the galaxy past the scars of ancient wars. They lost ships. They lost good people. But they pushed on, guided by the Keeper AI that Ren had left behind in the pod systems. Finally, they reached it. The rift, the gateway to the pocket universe. It was stable. It was clean. Vorian, now old and gray, his carapace scarred by time, stood on the bridge of the Ark of Humanity. He looked at the swirl of blue light ahead. We are leaving the old world behind, he said to the crew, a mix of a dozen species working side by side. We are leaving the rot. We are leaving the war. He looked at the empty captain's chair, which he had left vacant in honor of Vance. Engage, he ordered. The Ark slipped through the rift. On the other side, there was no darkness. There was a nebula of gold and green birthing new stars. Planets, fresh and cooling, waited for life. It was a blank canvas. Vorian smiled. He took a seed from his pocket, an acorn from the earth stalks. He held it up to the light of the new sun. Let us begin, he said. The story of the Valeri ended there. The story of the gardeners began. And somewhere in the echo of the old universe, the ghosts of the indomitable will stood watch, the eternal custodians, ensuring that the door remained closed so that the life inside could bloom. The decision to scan rather than fire had not just saved a ship. It had saved life itself. The humans had been underestimated, misunderstood, and feared, but in the end, they were exactly what they claimed to be. They were the ones who cared enough to die for a stranger's sunrise. And that, Vorian realized as he planted the first tree on the new world, was the most terrifyingly powerful weapon of all. The wind on the new world blew through the leaves of the sapling, a sound like a whisper. Humanity, fuck yeah, it seemed. To say, not with a roar, but with the quiet persistence of a root cracking a stone. The end,